Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our detective hats and doing a bit of a media autopsy. We're going to completely dissect the daily sports news we all consume and try reading between the lines to uncover the invisible filters shaping our perception of athletic greatness. We're talking about gender bias today, but honestly, not the super obvious kind you might be picturing. We are hunting for those subtle, almost invisible narratives that are hiding right in plain sight.
So I want you to just stop and think about the absolute last sports article you read. Try to picture the headline, think about the quotes or the way the athlete's struggles and triumphs were described. Now ask yourself, was that coverage based 100% purely on merit and athletic performance? Or was there maybe an invisible lens kind of coloring the way that story was told? We all love to think that modern sports media is this perfectly equal playing field where a gold medal is a gold medal no matter who's wearing it. But as we're about to see, the reality is a whole lot more complex. And that is exactly the central mystery we are unraveling today.
All right, to really understand the environment we're operating in, we first have to look at the baseline of sports journalism. And get this, international survey data shows that male athletes absolutely dominate the narrative in over 85% of all sports reports. 85%. Plus, the authorship of these reports, that remains overwhelmingly male too, sitting at over 90%. Just let the sheer scale of that discrepancy sink in for a second. When the vast majority of the stories are about men and written by men, it establishes a very, very specific normal in the sports world. Which brings us right to the core conflict of our explainer today. Because when female athletes actually do break through that 85% barrier and secure coverage, the way their stories are told often shifts in a pretty dramatic way. Think about it. Male athletes are typically framed strictly by their physical performance, right? Their strength, their speed, their absolute competitive dominance. But female athletes, they're frequently viewed through a much more emotional or personal lens. It is literally the difference between being praised for your pure tactical genius on the field versus being praised for your emotional resilience as a parent. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand why this split even exists in the first place, we have to look at an academic concept called hegemonic masculinity. Now, historically, sports have been culturally coded as a strictly male domain. The traits we tend to celebrate in athletics, like aggression, physical power, public dominance, well, those are the exact same traits traditionally associated with dominant masculinity. Because sport was quite literally built around these masculine expectations, female athletes who step into this space are sometimes unconsciously viewed as being out of place or incongruent with the norm. Now, we aren't just relying on abstract theory here, we have hard, concrete evidence. A really rigorous 2026 study out of a university in Spain analyzed the digital pages of Marca, which is this massive sports newspaper. And this is honestly the perfect case study because it isn't just cherry-picking isolated incidents. It looks at routine, everyday sports journalism to see exactly how these biases manifest in the real world. The researchers basically mapped out the suspect's MO by dividing gender stereotypes into 4 distinct dimensions. Here's the first one: performance-related stereotypes. This happens when a female athlete's physical competence is completely downplayed. So instead of attributing her success to raw, innate athletic skill, the media might just chalk it up to external factors, maybe a bit of luck or just sheer effort. It subtly whispers to the reader that she isn't naturally gifted. It frames her massive win as a lucky break, rather than, say, a masterclass in strategy. Moving on to the second dimension, appearance-focused stereotypes. Honestly, this is probably the one we are most historically familiar with. It's when the coverage zeroes in on an athlete's physical attractiveness, her body shape, or what she's wearing. It completely sidesteps her actual athletic achievements just to focus on her red carpet dress or her makeup. It yanks the viewer's attention right away from her competence and reframes her simply as an aesthetic object to be looked at. Dimension 3 highlights emotional and personal stereotypes. In this kind of framing, the coverage suddenly puts a huge emphasis on the athlete's private life, her role in her family, or her emotional vulnerabilities. Instead of highlighting her competitive grit or tactical mastery, the article might spend paragraphs dissecting her feelings, her relationships, or her home life. And these are details that, strangely enough, are almost never foregrounded when we're reading profiles of male champions. And finally, the fourth dimension is the masculine or feminine classification of the sports themselves. Basically, activities that involve physical contact, extreme speed, or brute strength are frequently labeled as inherently masculine. Meanwhile, sports emphasizing aesthetics or grace are viewed as feminine. This stereotype makes a female athlete participating in a contact or strength-based sport seem totally atypical. It's almost framed as if she's trespassing in a domain where she fundamentally just doesn't belong. So, how exactly did these researchers dust for fingerprints at the crime scene? Well, they systematically gathered 96 articles published in the digital edition of Marca between December 2025 and February 2026. Then, they took those 4 dimensions of stereotypes we just went over and applied them as a super strict coding framework. They painstakingly combed through nearly 100 contemporary articles, line by agonizing line, looking for the actual truth hiding behind the text. And here is the first major plot twist. Out of 96 articles, only 20 contained at least one gender stereotype. That is just 20.8%. What this tells us is incredibly revealing. Modern media bias isn't this relentless, systematic brick wall anymore. Nearly 80% of the articles were actually totally free of these specific stereotypes. The bias operates way more like a selective filter, catching maybe 1 out of every 5 articles. Now, what's really fascinating is what happens when we break down those 20 biased articles. Overt sexism about an athlete's appearance or performance, that was only found twice, just 2 times. But emotional and personal stereotypes, those popped up 13 times. The blatant, super obvious bias of the past has been almost entirely replaced by this highly subtle emotional narrative framing. So why does this matter? Well, we can anchor these surprising statistical findings in a psychology concept called role congruity theory. This theory basically states that individuals are evaluated less favorably when their behavior contradicts the traditional norms of their gender. Because elite athletic environments absolutely require assertiveness, high performance, and competitiveness, traits that, again, are culturally coded as masculine. Framing a female athlete primarily through her emotions or family life makes her seem less like a legitimate agency-driven competitor. It just subtly undermines her authority out there on the field. The absolutely crucial point here is that we aren't just talking about a few misplaced words on a screen. This selective narrative focus has massive, real-world consequences. By constantly emphasizing emotion over performance, the media is actively shaping how audiences evaluate these women. It lowers their perceived athletic legitimacy, it reinforces this incredibly outdated idea that sports are inherently a male space, and ultimately, because they're seen as less authoritative, it drastically reduces their visibility when it comes to future leadership opportunities in the sporting world. It's a whole chain reaction. Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of the Marca study. It's perfectly captured in this direct quote from the researchers. They wrote, "Gender stereotypes in contemporary Spanish sports journalism operate less through overt exclusion and more through subtle narrative emphasis." The days of outright denying women a place on the sports page, those are fading. The real bias today operates silently. It works in the background of the stories we read, just shifting the emphasis ever so slightly to change how we view the athlete. So that leaves us here. We've looked at the data, we've broken down the dimensions, and we've uncovered the subtle narrative emphasis at play in modern sports journalism. So I leave you with this challenge. You are no longer just a passive reader. The next time you open up an app, read a sports headline, or follow an athlete's journey, stop and ask yourself, what invisible filter are you really looking through? Are you reading about a fierce, undeniable competitor? Or are you being fed an emotional narrative designed to keep the playing field just a little bit uneven? Keep your eyes open.